So the question that immediately arises is, okay, if we are authors of the spatially unbound field of subjectivity that underlies all nature, I'll call it universal consciousness in short. If we are authors of universal consciousness, what is this universal consciousness? Well, strictly speaking, from an analytic perspective, all that we need to know about it is that it is experiential in nature. In other words, that it entails subjectivity, that it is qualitative as opposed to purely quantitative. Quantities are descriptions of it, but in and of itself, it is qualitative, experiential, subjective from its own perspective, even though it is objective from our perspective, in the same sense that the thoughts of another person are objective from your perspective, but they are subjective from their own perspective. So all we need is to say that universal consciousness is essentially subjective. It entails what philosophers today call core subjectivity. Now, what is core subjectivity? Imagine that you are in a perfect sensor deprivation chamber where it's perfectly dark, perfectly silent, and you're floating in water and you don't even feel your skin touching anything. In other words, you have no perceptions. Now imagine further that you become amnesic for a moment while inside that sensor deprivation chamber. You no longer remember your name, you don't know where you were born, you don't know what you do for a living, who you're married to, you forget everything. Now for a moment, when you forget everything and you perceive nothing, only one thing will be left, which is pure subjectivity. It is a field with potential experiences, but no memories, no perceptions, no discernible particular experience, just a potentiality for experience and a sort of I-ness or a me-ness. I-ness would be better. A pure I-ness without a narrative of self-identity. That experience that would remain when you are completely amnesic in a perfect sensory deprivation chamber is what analytic philosophers call core subjectivity. It is subjectivity without a story of when you were born, what your name is, what you do, who you are married to. No, forget all that. Even your humanness can be forgotten. Just like a baby doesn't know he or she is human. A baby in an ideal sensory deprivation chamber, a newborn in an ideal sensory deprivation chamber would consist from the inside of pure core subjectivity. That's all there would be in the mind of the baby is pure core subjectivity. And that's what universal consciousness essentially is, core subjectivity. Now, does it have its own experiences outside the experiences of living beings? It surely has, because when we look up to the sky, to the cosmos is dynamic. There are stars going supernova, there are black holes, there are galaxies colliding, stuff is happening. Now, stars are burning, planets are moving around their orbits, volcanoes are erupting in moons. A lot of stuff is happening. And that stuff is a representation on our dashboard of the mental activity of the universal consciousness. And if the representation is dynamic, then there is dynamic stuff happening in universal consciousness. Next to core subjectivity, which is what it is also having particular experiences, which are like excitations of core subjectivity. You can imagine core subjectivity as a guitar string. If the guitar string is at rest, there is no sound. But if you pluck it and you excite it, it makes a sound. Experiences are the sounds of core subjectivity. But notice that there is nothing to the sound produced by a guitar string when you pluck it, other than the string itself. The only thing that exists is the string. Whether it's at rest or being excited, there is only the string. So there is only core subjectivity, even if there are experiences, because experiences are excitations of the core subjectivity that the universal consciousness is. And then you might ask, okay, what do those experiences of universal consciousness feel like? And the only honest answer is, I don't know, and nobody alive can know. We are dissociated from it. All we can access are the representations, the extrinsic appearances of those experiences as represented on our dashboard. And we call them galaxies and galaxy clusters and supernovae and black holes and quasars and whatnot, planets and moons and volcanoes and rocks. But how they feel from their own first-person perspective, we cannot know. What we can say is the following. There may be a temptation to equate universal consciousness with a divinity, with God. It's difficult to say whether I think this is a good idea or not, because I don't know what most people mean by God. There are probably 7.5 billion different definitions of God in the world today. So whatever I say, it will make no sense. So I will limit myself to say something that I can say with some confidence. We are self-aware. We have what psychology calls metacognition. In other words, not only do we experience, we know that we experience. We explicitly recognize ourselves as a subjective entity that has experiences. And that's why we say, I have hunger, or I feel sad, as opposed to I am hunger and I am sadness. This distinction between our experiences and our core subjectivity, this distinction between the guitar string excited and the guitar string at rest, is what metacognition allows us to make. It allows us to think about our thoughts, to ponder our emotions. And this metacognition as a mental function has evolved at very great cost, over 4 billion years of evolution on a planetary ecosystem. The universal consciousness did not have to undergo evolution within a planetary ecosystem. It never has had to react to environmental challenges and eke out a living. It is unlikely that it is metacognitive itself, because metacognition very much seems to be the end result of 4 billion years of evolution. So we have it. My cat has less of it. The amoeba swimming on my garden pond probably has none of it. Are all three of them, I, my cat, and the amoeba, alters of the universal consciousness? I think so. We are all three living, metabolizing entities, which is the sort of empirical giveaway of a dissociative process in the mind of nature. But not all three are metacognitive. Only the most evolved one, me, seems to be metacognitive. So metacognition seems to be a product of evolution that we conquered at great, great cost over a very long time. It doesn't seem to be there from the beginning. Otherwise, maybe amoebas would be metacognitive. And I know some scientists would say, you know what, Bernardo, amoeba can even build their own conical-shaped houses by picking up mud particles from the bottom of your garden pond. And I know that can happen. But I think we could all agree that lower life forms, not in an ethical sense, lower in an evolutionary sense, exhibit a lot less signs of a metacognition than higher, more evolved life forms. Metacognition does not seem to be there from the get-go, does not seem to be there from the beginning. It's not there in mosquitoes, it's not there in frogs, it's not there in fish. At least we have no reasons to think that it is there. But it is there in people. It may be there in pachyderms, elephants. It may be there in cetaceans, whales and dolphins. And it's certainly there in humans. So I think we can say with some confidence that the universal consciousness outside highly evolved life forms is not metacognitive. If you apply the word God to it, then you have a God that is a natural God, a God that acts spontaneously. It does what it does because it is what it is, not because it has a plan, not because it has thought things through, not because it has a premeditated idea about where it wants to go. No, it is spontaneous. It unfolds because it is what it is. To be is to have properties. So universal consciousness has properties. And what it does is determined by those properties. Its actions, stars going supernovae, black holes swallowing galaxies, these actions are the spontaneous unfolding of the mental properties of universal consciousness. They are not the product of premeditated design or an explicit plan about where to go. And to me, at least, this is comforting, because a metacognitive God that allows for this bloodbath that survival in a planetary ecosystem is, would be a sadistic God, wouldn't it? Or a God that has a level of intelligence that is completely beyond us, so we cannot understand the reason for all this suffering. But regardless of these value judgments, I don't think we have enough objective, clear-minded, empirical reason to postulate higher level mental functions as inherent characteristics of the universal consciousness as a whole. I think higher level mental functions are the characteristics of highly evolved life forms, thanks to the pressures of fitness and survival in a planetary ecosystem. All right, so if the cosmos, as we see through our telescopes, through the Hubble, through the James Webb telescope, if this physical cosmos is a representation of the mind of nature, its mental processes, how do we reconcile it with what we know about the cosmos? Like, say, the theory of the Big Bang, which is an event that supposedly happened 3.8 billion years ago and set out the universe in a continuous expansion and complexification thanks to quantum fluctuations and other processes we know about nature. How can we accommodate the Big Bang into this analytic idealist perspective? Let me start by saying that I personally do take the Big Bang very seriously. There are other cosmological hypotheses out there that are less empirically substantiated than the Big Bang. And in recent times with the James Webb, there are some people even making noise that the James Webb telescope has shown that the Big Bang is not true. I think that is nonsense. I think the pictures show no such a thing. They only show that our particular cosmological models about the early evolution of the universe need some work, need some fine-tuning. But the evidence suggesting that the universe has expanded from a singularity is overwhelming. The cosmic radiation background even shows where the quantum fluctuations happen that gave birth to stars, planets, galaxies, galaxy clusters, and so on and so forth, out of the initially uniform field of energy that arose immediately after the Big Bang. So I take the Big Bang very seriously. And some people might then say, well, if you take it seriously, Bernardo, then there was a universe prior to the rise of life. Life arose on this planet, the Earth, about 4 billion years ago. We used to think 3.5. I think the latest is 4 billion years ago. And the Big Bang happened 13.8 billion years ago. So what was the universe before life? Because according to analytic idealism, the physical universe is a cognitive representation of living beings. If there is no living being to cognitively represent the universe, then there is no physical universe, because physicality is the representation. Physicality is the dashboard. If there is no airplane flying around the sky, there is no dashboard. But that doesn't mean that there is no sky. The sky exists whether there is an airplane measuring it and showing the measurements on the dashboard or not. So the universe existence, whatever it is in and of itself, has existed before life, before an organism arose that would represent it on its own dashboard. But the universe is not physical. Physicality is a representation of the universe. So before life, there was no such representation, but the universe was there. Whatever transpersonal mental processes corresponded to the universe before the rise of life, they were there. There was mentation in the mind of nature before life arose. And we model that early mentation along the lines of what we call Big Bang theory. So the Big Bang is something roughly similar to it, roughly similar to a rapid expansion. Colloquially, I could even say an explosion, although that's not quite accurate, but something like an explosion happened in the mind of nature. I believe so. I believe so from a conceptual perspective. We can get in a level deeper where I might tell you that this is just a convenient theory, but I'm not going there in this course. As far as convenient theories are concerned, the Big Bang is a very, very convenient one, an almost inescapable one. And it's entirely reconcilable with analytic idealism. There was mentation in the mind of nature before life arose. And if there would have been life looking at it back then, that life would have seen it as something more or less like an explosion. There was no life. Nobody saw it that way. But that doesn't mean that the sky wasn't there before airplanes started flying. Something happened 13.8 billion years ago. Now, was there mentation before that? That question is impossible to answer in a coherent way. And the reason is, the same models that tell us that something like a Big Bang happened also tell us that there was no time before the Big Bang. So to ask what happened before the Big Bang is as absurd a question as to ask what is the marital status of the number 5. It's the wrong question to ask. And I know it's very hard to wrap one's mind around it because we have to think in terms of time. There was time before the Big Bang, but unfortunately, no. There was no time before the Big Bang. Time is an emergent phenomenon of what happened after. Before the Big Bang, there was no time, and there was not even space. So the Big Bang didn't happen in a place. There was no place. To explore this in more detail, would have to go much deeper into the physics of it, but it's beyond the scope of what we are doing here.